All right, let's jump right in. We're going to take a trip back in time, not just through ancient history, but through the very landscape that shaped how a world-changing idea went viral. We're exploring the world of the first Christians. And this really gets to the heart of it, right? How in the world did a small, often persecuted faith, from what was basically a backwater province, manage to spread and eventually become the religion of the Roman Empire itself? The same empire that tried to crush it? Well, the answer isn't where you might think. It's not in any palace or on a battlefield. Nope. The real story unfolds right here, on the ground, on the dusty roads and the risky sea lanes of the Eastern Mediterranean. We're talking about the area we now call Turkey and Greece. And back then, this place was the absolute crossroads of the ancient world. So to really get this, we have to kind of zoom out from the traditional Holy Land. We need to follow the story as it just bursts out of its original setting, moving from the familiar streets of Jerusalem into the much bigger, messier, and more complicated Greco-Roman world. And listen, this part of the world was not some empty, quiet landscape. Not at all. It was more like a historical Grand Central Station, a corridor where empires rose and fell, and where armies had been marching back and forth for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is what's so wild. You can see the sheer traffic of power. You've got the Hittites way back, then bam, the Persians under Darius and Xerxes come pushing west. But then, the script completely flips. Alexander the Great and his armies march east. And by the time our story starts, in the 1st century, the Romans are in charge of the whole shebang. All of this constant movement, this churn of people and power, created the perfect environment for a brand new idea to spread like wildfire. Okay, so let's get our bearings because the geography here is absolutely critical. The seas, the mountains, those narrow passages, they didn't just determine where you'd build a road, they literally shaped the path this new faith would follow. I mean, just look at it. This world is practically defined by water. You've got the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Black Sea, and connecting them are these critical bottlenecks, the Hellespont and the Bosporus. Then, cutting right through the land, you have these massive mountain ranges, like the Taurus. They basically acted like giant funnels, forcing all travel and all communication, whether it was armies, merchants, or missionaries, along very specific routes. And that geographic funnel leads us right to the main character in this expansion story, the Apostle Paul. You really can't overstate his role. His journeys are literally the blueprint for how this faith went from being a small local movement to a force that spanned the empire. And here's a detail that's so easy to miss. This whole thing didn't kick off in some sleepy little village. No way. It launched from Antioch. We're talking the 3rd largest city in the entire Roman Empire, right behind Rome and Alexandria. This was a massive cosmopolitan hub. And it's right here, in this bustling city, that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians. And you can see a real strategy at play here. It wasn't random at all. The first journey was kind of like a test run, a short regional trip. The second one? Boom! That was the huge leap when he crosses from Asia into Europe for the very first time. And the third journey was all about shoring things up, revisiting those new communities to make sure they were solid. It's like watching a network being built in real time. To see this strategy up close, let's zoom in on one city, Corinth. Now, to get why Corinth was so important, you just need to know one little geographic term, isthmus. It's basically a land bridge, and Corinth sat smack in the middle of a super important one. If you wanted to travel by land from mainland Greece down into the Peloponnese, you had to go through Corinth. It was an absolute choke point for commerce, for culture, for everything. Talk about a prime location to introduce a new idea. And this is where things get really cool, where the ancient text and modern archaeology just line up perfectly. In that area, archaeologists found this thing, the Gallio inscription. It's a public notice that names the Roman proconsul Gallio, who, get this, is also mentioned by name in the book of Acts during Paul's stay in Corinth. This is like finding a historical anchor. It allows us to pin Paul's visit to an incredibly specific, verifiable window of time, 51 to 52 AD. Okay, let's hop over to another one of these megacities, Ephesus. And to give you a sense of just how big and important this place was, check out its theater. It could hold 24,000 people. Can you even imagine? And this was the heart of the city's public life. It's also the exact spot described in the book of Acts where a massive riot broke out because Paul's message was threatening the livelihood of the local silversmiths, who made shrines to the goddess Artemis. Just picture that chaos erupting in a stadium of that size. But Paul wasn't the only one communicating with these new communities. The story picks up again years later in the very last book of the New Testament, Revelation. It actually opens with a series of short letters addressed to 7 specific churches, all located in the same region we've been looking at. And whoa, the language in these letters is intense. I mean, just listen to this line, written to the church in the city of Pergamum. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yikes. That is some seriously dramatic language. What on earth could that possibly be referring to? Well, it turns out, when you look at the archaeology of Pergamum, it all clicks into place. The city's Acropolis, its high point, was dominated by this absolutely colossal structure, the Great Altar of Zeus. We're talking massive. You could see it from miles away. So imagine you're part of this tiny Christian community, living literally in the shadow of this giant throne dedicated to a pagan god. Yeah, it would have felt like you were living at the enemy's headquarters. Okay, now for one of my favorite examples of how geography brings the text to life. It's in a message to the church in Laodicea, and it contains this famous metaphor that makes almost no sense until you understand the local plumbing. Seriously. So, piece number 1 of the puzzle. Just to the north of Laodicea was the spa town of Hierapolis, famous for its therapeutic boiling hot springs. All right, piece number 2. To the south, aqueducts brought pure, refreshingly cold water down from mountain springs. So just to be clear, you've got boiling hot water coming from one direction and ice-cold water coming from the other. And the city of Laodicea is sitting right in the middle. And here's the payoff. The letter says, "So, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth." See, for us today, lukewarm just means unenthusiastic. But to anyone living in Laodicea, this was a gut punch. They knew that by the time the hot water from Hierapolis or the cold water from the mountains reached their city through the long aqueducts, it became this tepid, disgusting, mineral-filled sludge. It wasn't hot enough to be useful or cold enough to be refreshing. It was literally something you would spit out of your mouth. It's a brilliant metaphor, grounded completely in their daily lived experience. So when you put this all together, it brings us to this final, really powerful contrast. It's like a tale of 2 cities, representing 2 totally different worldviews that collided on these very roads and in these very cities, Athens and Jerusalem. On one side, you've got Athens, symbolizing the whole Greco-Roman world. It's all about imperial power, human philosophy, and these magnificent buildings of marble. It's a culture of grandeur that you can see and touch. But on the other side, you've got Jerusalem, representing this new faith. Its kingdom was spiritual, its authority was based on divine revelation, and its structures, well, its structures weren't made of stone. They were made of people, carrying a message. And that's the ultimate takeaway here. Today, you can go and visit these places, the Great Altar of Zeus, the Parthenon, the massive theater at Ephesus. They are all stunning, magnificent ruins. The empires that built them are long gone, and yet that intangible idea, the one with no buildings, no army, that was just carried by ordinary people from town to town, it didn't just endure. It went on to fundamentally reshape the world we live in. Which I think leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Why is it that some ideas turn out to be more durable than stone?